Hello friends, welcome back to this online lecture series. A very good morning to each and every one of you. The title of our lecture for today is Separation of Powers and Checks and Balances in the Constitution of United States. In the previous two lectures, we were focusing on the salient features of the Constitution of United States and again, the federal system or the working of the federal system in the United States. In fact, separation of powers and checks and balances is a very unique feature of the Constitution of United States and has been an integral part or inseparable part of the United States polity. A healthy combination of these two principles is found nowhere else in the world except in the United States Constitution. Now let us begin with an overview. The original draft of the US Constitution of 1787 has only 7 articles. It is one of the shortest constitutions in the world till date. This constitution has been enforced in 1789 and since then it has been amended at least 27 times. Whereas the first 3 articles embody the principle or doctrine of separation of powers, the next 3 articles deals with the working of federalism in the United States. The first article deals with the legislative branch or the Congress. The second article deals with the president or the executive branch. And the third article deals with the judiciary or the Supreme Court and its subordinate courts. The last article, that is Article 7, establishes the procedure subsequently used by the 13 colonies or 13 states to ratify the Constitution. Now let us begin with separation of powers. It is generally accepted that there are 3 main categories of governmental functions. There is legislative, executive, and judicial. Likewise, there are 3 main organs of the government. In a state, there is legislature, executive, and judiciary. One organ is for one function. According to the theory of separation of powers, these 3 powers or functions of government must be kept separate and be exercised by 3 separate organs of the government. The term separation of powers was coined by Montesquieu, the 18th century French philosopher who had left a strong impact on the founding fathers of the Constitution of United States. Montesquieu stated that there would be an end of everything, while the same man or same body, whether of the nobles or of the people, to exercise those 3 powers, thereof enacting laws, thereof executing the public resolutions, and of trying the causes of the individuals. Montesquieu believed that concentration of power in one person or a group of persons results in tyranny. So, in order to check arbitrariness, he felt the need for vesting the governmental power in 3 different organs of government. In a similar vein, one of the founding fathers of the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson, quoted that the concentration of legislative, executive, and judicial powers in the same hands is precisely the definition of despotic government. The federal government of the United States is therefore composed of 3 distinct branches: legislative, executive, and judiciary, whose powers are vested by the US Constitution in the Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court respectively. There are no other major constitutions in the world in which the demarcation of the 3 wings of government, that is, legislature, executive, and judiciary, is as clear as in the United States. The principle of separation of powers is, in fact, one of the most important features of the Constitution of the United States. According to Professor Oak, no feature of American government, national, state, and often local is more characteristic than separation of powers combined with precautionary checks and balances. Now let us see some example to illustrate that there is clear division of power or separation of power among the 3 branches. First, the president has a fixed tenure and is not responsible to the Congress. In fact, the president or the executive branch is independent of the legislative branch of the government. Similarly, in the second point, the Congress is independent of the president since the president can neither prorogue nor dissolve or even preside over its session. As the President is independent of the Congress is also independent of the President. The President, unlike India, can neither prorogue nor dissolve or even preside over its sessions. Third, the Supreme Court is independent of both legislature and executive. For instance, no judges of the Supreme Court who are appointed for life can be removed except by a very difficult impeachment processes. Of course, the Supreme Court judges are appointed by the President, and the way how they are going to function is decided by the Congress, but they cannot simply remove once they are appointed. Harman Feiner described this principle as, the American Constitution was consciously and elaborately made an essay in the separation of powers and is today the most important policy in the world which operates upon that principle. Unlike India, where the parliament consists of both the two houses and the president, in the United States, each of the three wings is separate and distinct without being dependent on each other. In India, the parliament consists of both the two houses and the president, but in the United States, the president is not part of the Congress. Now let's come to checks and balances. The principles of checks and balances and separation of powers are two sides of the same coin. This healthy combination is one of the most unique features of the Constitution of the United States. In fact, there is no other constitution in the world where such healthy combination is found. Checks and balances is a governmental structure that gives each of the three branches of government a degree of control over the actions of the other. That means, though they are separated, although they are independent of each other, each branches of the government control the other two branches. This allows one branch to limit another, or this allows one branch to control the other branch from becoming too powerful or too despotic. Checks and balances is needed not only to prevent one branch of government from becoming supreme, but also to protect the minority from the majority and to induce the branches to cooperate. However, the American Constitution did not produce a clean severance of or complete separation of the three organs of the government. In fact, they check each other or they balance each other. There are separation of powers, but this separation of power is not in a watertight compartment. Now let us see the role of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary so that we can also understand in more detail how they check and balance each other. First, Article 1 of the Constitution says that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. In short, all the legislative functions of the government is vested in the Congress. This is clearly defined in Article 1 of the Constitution. Second, the legislative branch has the power to pass bills, impose taxes, control the federal budget, and borrow money on the credit of the United States. This implies that all the income and expenditures of the government, including those of the executive and judiciary, are to be decided by the Congress. The executive and the judiciary cannot act as they wish. They have to see, or they have to wait for the law passed by the Congress. The Congress has the sole power to declare as well as to raise, support, and regulate the military. Though the military is part of the executive branch of the government, with the president as the chief or commander-in-chief of the armed forces, it is the duty of the Congress to decide how the military should be raised and maintained. The Congress also defined by law the jurisdiction of the federal judiciary in cases not specified by the Constitution. This also means again that though the Supreme Court is the sole interpreter of the Constitution or the guardian of the Constitution, the Congress has the power to decide on matters which are not clearly defined or mentioned in the Constitution. The Senate again is in charge of ratifying treaties signed by the President and gives advice and consent to presidential appointments to the federal judiciary and executive departments. In short, all important treaties and appointments made by the President are to be approved or ratified by the Senate, which is the second chamber of the Congress. It is a well-known fact that though Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, accepted the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 and was the main architect of the League of Nations, his country, that is, the United States, had never become a member of League of Nations because the Senate refused to ratify it. Again, the House of Representatives has the sole power of impeachment. There is no authority in the United States which can impeach a high-ranking officer. Similarly, the Senate has the power to try those officials facing cases of impeachment. In other words, the Senate is the court of impeachment against the President and other high officers of the United States, including the judges of the Supreme Court. In case of impeachment, the Senate becomes the court of impeachment. The role of the executive. Article 2, Section 1 stated that the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. In other words, the President represents the executive branch of the government. The President is the head of state of the United States. He is the executive head, he is the head of government, or he is the head of state. Not only that, he is also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The President declares states of emergency, publishes regulations, and executes orders, makes executive agreements, and signs treaties. However, these treaties require the ratification of the Senate with a vote of two-thirds majority, meaning the President is not absolutely free to act in his own volition, but is always checked by the Senate or the legislative branch of the government. The President implement or sometimes vetoed bills passed by the Congress, or sometimes give assent to the bill passed by the Congress, and also sometimes execute spending authorized by Congress. This means that the President not only executes the law framed by the Congress, but also possesses the power to control the lawmaking power of the Congress. All bills passed by the Congress must be submitted to the President for his approval, and in the process, he can either accept the bill or exercise his power of pocket veto. The President can also exercise his influence on the Congress by using threat of convening a special session. In the case of special session, the Congress members will not get any remuneration or any TA and DA, so they normally don't want to attend a special session except on very important matter. So the President can influence the Congress by using a threat to convene special session. This means that though the legislative branch is the sole lawmaking authority, the President can use certain power to influence or to reject or to kill the law passed by the legislative branch. Now, the President makes appointments to the federal judiciary, executive departments, and other posts with the advice and consent of the Senate, and has power to make temporary appointments during the recess of the Senate. Of course, in most of his activities, it is to be checked by the Senate, but when the Senate is not in session, he can make temporary appointment as well. In other words, the President is always being checked by the Senate, except when it is in recess. The President also has the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in the case of impeachment. In case of impeachment, the President has no role at all, but in case of other crime or other offenses, the President can pardon or reduce the punishment of a person or a criminal. This power is vested with the president alone. Now let's come to the role of the judiciary. Article 3, Section 1 provided that the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time disdain and establish. In other words, the Supreme Court exercises the power of judiciary under the Constitution of the United States. The Supreme Court also exercises the power of judicial review and reviews the constitutionality of laws framed by the Congress. It can nullify any law passed by the Congress or such executive orders issued by the President if they are found to be at variance with the spirit of the Constitution. This means that the Supreme Court has its role to check the working of both the legislature and executive branch of the government. The judicial power of the Supreme Court extends to all cases, laws, and treaties of the United States, and it also extends to the whole of the country. The Supreme Court also determines how laws should be interpreted to assure uniformity. In other words, the Supreme Court, as the sole interpreter of law, should also sometimes interpret in such a way that it suits the changing dynamic or environment of the society. Now let's come to short critical assessment of the principles that we have discussed. From the above discussions, it is clear that the principles of separation of powers and checks and balances are intertwined in a healthy condition in the American Constitution. However, it may not be our place to point out that the principle of checks and balances, which were designed to promote overall equilibrium, often worsen rather than reduce the ill effects of separation of powers. Checks and balances is actually mean to reduce the ill effect or the negative impact which may arise out of the separation of power. But instead of reducing such negative impact, the principle sometimes increases the negative side of the principle of separation of power. For instance, the presidential veto has been misused or abused many times, and the Senate often stood as a barrier in the way of the president. For example, though Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, was very much part of the foundation of League of Nations or the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the Senate always stood as a barrier or as a stumbling block so that the president never get to achieve his desired goal. In other words, United States never become part of the League of Nations because the Senate did not approve it. So in many cases, the Senate stood as a barrier or as a stumbling block to the way of the president. The Supreme Court too has been acting as a super legislature or a third chamber, implying that checks at times prove as irritant and eventually become an eyesore. The power of judicial review, or the Supreme Court being the sole interpreter of law, or the Supreme Court being the guardian of the Constitution, sometimes overact to become sort of a third legislature or super legislature or third chamber of the legislature. These are sometimes not a healthy one for the smooth function of the United States administration. In short, the principle of checks and balances, which was designed to promote overall equilibrium, often operate rather to aggravate than ameliorate the ill effects of separation of power, as in the case of the presidential veto and senatorial assent to treaties. However, this constitutional division, called separation of powers, is designed to prevent any branch of the government from becoming too powerful or too despotic or supreme. In addition, the Constitution creates checks and balances by providing the means by which each branch is required to work with the other branches in order to carry out its functions. In spite of some of its drawbacks, the principle of separation of powers and checks and balances has more positive impacts in the Constitution of the United States. In other words, it has more merit than demerit. Thank you so much. This is the end of our lecture for today. In the next lecture, we will be discussing about the office of the President or the executive branch of the government of United States of America. Bye for today. Please leave your comment, leave your feedback so that I might be able to improve my style of lecture in the next video. Thank you so much and bye for today.